viewers, thank you very much for logging in for this webinar, though it is late in the night. I am Deepak Naik. On behalf of Health and You, would like to welcome you for this webinar. Today is the International Day Against the Drug Abuse. So let us say no to drugs and alcohol. We are happy to welcome you on behalf of Health and You and Jagruti Foundation. This live webinar is conducted through Health and You and Jagruti Foundation on the auspicious occasion of Say No to Drugs. And the topic of today's webinar is Addiction and Suicide, a Complicated Relationship. Welcome to the digital initiative DigiNeuro by Health and You. This is a joint venture with New Link Company Limited, Japan. We have few innovative products, and for today's topic we have a Backride Baclofen, which is used for alcohol de-addiction. We have Backride 10, 20XR, 30XR. This is available at 45% less price and available as a small tablet. So that is an advantage. So your patients can save over 2,700 rupees per month when they are on Backride for alcohol de-addiction. We have a innovative strength of clobazam. 2.5 milligram strength was not available in the market. We launched Adclobaz 2.5, 5 and 10 in mouth dissolving tablet. You can prescribe it in daytime anxiety. We have a very innovative combination of amitriptyline and mecobalamin for neuropathic pain and migraine and tension type of headache. Amnuride 5, 10 and 25. When migraine is not controlled by one drug, we have amitriptyline plus propranolol combination. Amnuride beta 520ER and 1040ER. These are our innovative products. And very recently we have launched in migraine vitamin therapy for migraine supported by American Academy of Neurology, riboflavin 200 mg, magnesium 200 mg, and CoQ10 10 mg. We have Neurite active L-methylfolate, mecobalamin, and pyridoxal 5-phosphate to improve antidepressant response by 87%. That is Neurite active. So very innovative and differentiated products. Just 6 or 7 of them from Health and You. Now I have great pleasure in introducing Dr. Amar Shinde. He is postgraduate in psychiatry from BJ Medical College, Pune. Psychiatry. He was also a psychiatrist in Regional Mental Hospital, the largest in the world in Pune, Erevda. Dr. Shinde wanted to do something for the community at large, and he identified the problem of dementia patients, both of patients and the caregivers, the kind of challenge that they go through in taking care of dementia patients. So he founded Jagruti Rehabilitation Center in 2008, and today it is a facility of rehabilitation for dementia, for psychologically challenged people, for mentally challenged people, of 200 beds facility in Pune and 100-bed facility in Mumbai. Jagruti has now got a sanction for even DPM course for MBBS students for psychiatry. He is also very, very active in awareness of for medical professionals and community at large. So I present to you Dr. Amar Shinde, who will coordinate this webinar. This is his conceptualization on today's day of say no to drug addiction. So Dr. Amar Shinde, over to you.
Thank you for kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. Today is International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. That's why we chose this topic. But why this topic? Why suicide? Suicide is addiction's hidden risk, and every time it is neglected by the patients, by the relatives, and everyone. That's why we chose this topic. Also, these two things are having complicated relationships. As suicidal thoughts and suicidal thinking, depression increases the chances of addictions. Same time, addictions also increases the chances of suicide and completing the suicide. That's why we have chose this topic. Depression, anxiety, suicide, these are the vicious cycle and addictions. And ultimately, they are patient is committing or ending life with the suicide. Suicide is a hot topic after Sushant Singh Rajput episode. Everyone is discussing in India. Everyone is talking. Many people are talking how to behave, how to engage yourself. They are explaining each other. Along with it, celebrities are mostly addicted to the drugs also. Many celebrities are doing alcohol and addictions, we all know. That's why today we are discussing these things. If we see the epidemiology, in India, suicide is one of the 10th cause, 10th top causes of death. And if you look at the 12 to 35 years of age, it is the number one cause of death, and which we can easily cure or we can easily prevent. That's why we have to discuss it and we have to understand why this is happening. Many people with the usually many people use alcohol and other addictions to relieve their depression, anxiety, or OCD, or any psychological problems. Usually they use for temporary improvement, but it is not improving the people. Ulta, they are the depression, the duration of the depression is increasing, and the severity of the symptoms are increasing. Also, along with that, addiction causing the disruption in the family structure. Also, their financial, jobs, everything is getting disrupted because of the addictions. Also, loss of judgment. Not everyone is fortunate like in Sholay, because sometimes they threat for the something that they want after intoxication, but they lose judgment and they can end their life. Currently, the corona situation is too much. Everybody is panic. All the society is in anxiety, and in that period, there is also a lockdown, also depressive thoughts, loss of finances. Everything is going on, and it is looking like along with the pandemic of corona, there is a epidemic of suicide. So we have to discuss all the things related to suicide, and addiction is important thing. Around 90% of suicides are due to some psychological illness and with substance disorder. And if we calculate the epidemiology, around 30% of suicides are related to addictions. Today, we have divided this topic in the 3 lectures. First lectures, alcohol dependence, depression and suicide. Second will be drug addiction, depression and suicide. And third will be behavioral addiction and depression and suicide. So we will, alcohol is the most common, well-known associated with suicide. Around 30% of people commit, 30% people end their life with due to suicide under influence. Alcohol is causing major impact in their all dynamics of life, their financial dynamics, their working, their social, their familial, everything is getting disrupted due to alcohol. That will add to their misery, depression, and the vicious cycle will continue. Let's invite Dr. Shubhangi Parker ma'am, who is having in-depth knowledge in addiction and expert in treating addiction as well as all psychological patients. She is a professor emeritus, former professor, head of the Department of Psychiatry, KEM Hospital and Research Center, Mumbai, former chief of Bombay Drug De-Addiction Center, former conveyor MCI Nodal Center, former dean, academic dean of GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai, Parel. So she is having great experience. Let's understand about alcohol and its effect. So I welcome Dr. Shubhangi Parker, madam. Ma'am, please.
Namaskar. Hello. I think it's a very important day today. And can you see my slides?
Please share the slides.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you see?
Yes.
Yes. It's very important because we are in the era of corona, but I believe depression, alcohol and suicide are major risks for the public health. And this is where we have to understand that it is 1 million people are likely to commit suicide, and suicide is among 10 causes of death in every country. 10 to 20 times of this probably have the attempted suicide. In some country, even 38%, like Finland, where you can see 38% of the one suicide case are the attempted suicide. Remember that it's not just the individual phenomena. 5 to 6 people are affected by an individual suicidal behavior. And in fact, they have the most nagging and most sad life after a one suicide in the family or in the friends. And one of the three leading causes of the death is the suicide in the age group of 15 to 35 years. The occurrence of either major depressive event or alcohol use disorder doubles the risk of developing the other disorder. So this is very important for us to know because they are individually important and they have doubling effect on the other disorder. Co-occurrence of MD and alcohol use disorder bodes poorly for the treatment outcomes. So, I mean, it's a very unfortunate if the patient have both these disorders. Specifically, the presence of major depression has been associated with worse alcohol treatment outcomes. That is, the relapse rates are pretty faster. In fact, in the 4 months time, you can see the relapse rate if the depression goes untreated. Suicide is itself is not a disease. Remember that. Not necessarily the manifestation of a disease. Mental disorders are a major factor associated with the suicide. Improved detection, referral, and management of psychiatric disorder in primary care as well as in the secondary tertiary is important step to suicide prevention. So, in fact, today's theme of this day is the better knowledge for better care. And that's the reason why to identify, assess, and manage suicidal patient is an important task for most of the mental health professionals and particularly for psychiatrists. Depression is a common condition, we know. It affects about 1 in every 15 people. Though it can arise in any point in person's life, it is most common seen for the first time during the person's late teen to the mid-20s. That means the early youth. As far as gender role goes, women are at significantly higher risk for depression than men. Suicide in major depressive event and in alcohol use disorder have a heightened risk for the suicide. Remember that these two disorders together. In 30% of the deaths by suicide in the United States, blood alcohol levels were determined to be at or above the legal level at the time of the suicide event. 50% of those who died by suicide were suffering from major depression at the time of death, and probably they also have found further that there wasn't any antidepressant, or if the antidepressants were given, the level was much less. Compared to the general population, having alcohol use disorder put 1 at a 10-fold higher risk for the suicide. Remember that. So alcohol is worse than corona at this juncture too. Therefore, patients with co-occurring alcohol use and depressive disorders are generally being together at specifically unique high risk for the suicide. About 60% of the people who commit suicide have had a more have a mood disorder, maybe major depression, bipolar disorder, dysthymia. Younger persons who kill themselves often have SUD and MD. About 2% of those people ever treated for depression in the outpatient setting will die by suicide. That's a statistic. The rate of death by suicide is twice, that is 4% in inpatient population of these disorders. 7% of men with lifetime history of depression will die by suicide, while only 1% of the women with lifetime history of depression will die by suicide. This is an interesting statistic. Etiology of this relationship, difficult. There is a little consensus on etiology of this relationship. Psychosocial theories are talking in a different direction. Biological theories probably are talking into the neurotransmitters, neurochemicals way. But remember, mood disorders precipitating the alcohol use disorders and vice versa. Sharing a common risk factor, which we will see. Alteration in an individual judgment or ability to appreciate consequences of substance use because of psychopathology of depression. And that's a very, very important consideration as a clinicians to us. Heterogeneity of the theories themselves highlights the complex relationship between psychopathology of depression and substance use disorders in general, and alcohol and depression is by and large is understood better in all other substance use disorder. Now in the assessment, what is that we need to really take into account as we go through? See, primary depressive disorder is due to the effect of chronic alcohol use, yes or no, which we have to really decide and hard to decide. Okay, it's not very easy if we do not get the proper history, proper family history, okay, proper symptoms. It is difficult to predict whether depressive symptoms will look the same or different in the pattern of alcohol use changes and vice versa. There are some researchers, they said that in the alcoholism, irritability and violent behavior in depressive disorder is more common, but it's very difficult to say. The patient's self-report of the relationship between drinking and depressive symptoms may not be reliable. Sometimes they say they feel sad, that's why they are doing it. Sometimes they feel uncontrolled, that's why they are doing it. So it's very unreliable, and as such, because of the cognitive symptoms, they are not able to identify themselves what is happening to their alcoholism and their depression. So that's really defective error which happens because of the cognitive trouble. We have to probably depend to the chronology of the symptoms. Like, again, very difficult, because when depression started and when alcoholism started, nobody probably able to identify. Collateral information from the relatives, from the friends will matter a lot, because they are the one probably must have observed the tracking of these two disorders, and an appropriate medical evaluation is must. We just cannot look at the depression and alcohol. We have to probably start looking at thyroid and many other issues which can be endocrinal, which can be metabolic, and which is very important because they contribute into the mood pathology a lot. Assessment also is very important when we have to look at the mood symptoms during the periods of abstinence. And there's a reason why the follow-up is very essential. A family history of mood disorder probably will point us towards identifying depressive events with the alcohol. A treatment history can also be enlightening, because remember that if the relapse is happening more quickly within the 6 months time, within the 4 months time, probably we have to start thinking about mood disorders, and then being more curious about this particular mood event in identifying in the tracking of the alcohol use disorders. To treat despite this lack of clarity we have, and follow the patient's memory over the time is a clinical challenge. And there's a reason why what all of us as a clinician need to do is revisit and adjust the patient's diagnosis. So our clinical calculations, our clinical judgment will matter a lot in understanding, because it's not very easy. It's not a typical book picture when alcohol and depression go together. A typical depressive episodes, we know we have the triad of those symptoms. We have tiredness, sadness, lack of concentration, anxiety, sleep disturbances. Now, sleep disturbances are complicated when depression is associated with alcohol use disorders. Of course, irritability, helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness, this particular triad always remains strong in these both the pathologies when they are together. Pain in the different parts of the body, because alcoholics have the neuropathy and other organ disorders. So these symptoms become more predominant sometimes, not just hypochondriasis. They may be real symptoms, and the complaint of the symptoms will be little exacerbated there. Increased risk of the suicide in depression is associated with persistent insomnia, self-neglect, severe severity of the illness, impaired memory, agitation, panic, cognitive distortions, which we have identified, differently. Then age below 25 years in the main early phase of the illness, abuse of alcohol, depressed phase of a bipolar disorder, which is very important, mixed state is important, and psychotic mania sometimes when we see, in the depression. And we have to be extremely careful because clinical judgment matters a lot. Alcoholism, biological, psychological, and social explanations are many. We are right now very happy to know many biological hypotheses on which our treatment, substitution treatments are depending upon. But early onset of alcoholism, long history of drinking, high level of dependence, depressed mood, poor physical health, poor job performance, family history of alcoholism, recent disruption or loss of a major interpersonal relationship. A very, very important pointer I found in my clinical practice, because anything which happens in the interpersonal relationship can lead to, if there is a depression and alcohol together, lead to suicide. So this is a very important. It is a common phenomena. A third of those who suffer from major depression have a co-occurring alcohol use disorder. Overlapping genetic predisposition is there. The onset of one condition can trigger the onset of the other, and it is also vice versa. Remember, hangovers of the alcohol are often accompanied by the feeling of depression, and that makes a very complicated clinical picture for a clinician, and we really need to wait, till the withdrawal goes away. Continued alcohol abuse can lead to longer periods of depression. While depression can put a person at a greater risk to develop an alcohol problem, the inverse is even more common rather. Depression can arise and increase during a battle with alcoholism. The people who want to give up alcohol generally go through dysphoria or depression proper. Increase in depression can then lead to more drinking, thus perpetuating the cycle from the other angle. So alcohol withdrawal, more depression, more alcoholic dependence, and that's the way cycle goes on. Patient at high risk, we have to look at these common factors, which are divorced, widowed, single status person, living alone, unemployed or retired, marital separation, family disturbances, change in occupational and financial status. The debt is again one of the important aspects when these both pathologies are together leading to suicide. And a very quick one, if we think back on our clinical experience. Then there are some life stressors which are again extremely common for these two disorders, that is marital separation, bereavement, family disturbance, change in the occupational job, rejection by a significant person, shame and threat of being found guilty because of some behavioral perspective, management of suicide patient. I'll come to this slide little later. When to hospitalize, I'll come later. We have to look at several different conceptual approaches. Historically, the sequential model has held significant sway. Depressive symptoms are not addressed until a period of abstinence from alcohol has been achieved in many clinical practices, which is a very important perspective. Then there is a parallel model. On the other hand, both disorders are addressed simultaneously together, but by different clinicians or treatment team. For example, you as a general psychiatrist, you'll end up preferring this patient to addiction psychiatrist. Okay, so that is a parallel model, and both these are together treated by the two specialists in the psychiatry. And the integrated model, a single clinician or a treatment team manages both the mood disorder and alcohol use disorder simultaneously. Now, all these models have the advantage and disadvantage in many ways, but integrated model probably becomes important, and that's the reason why every general psychiatrist need to understand the addiction psychiatry and alcohol treatment programs properly well. The treatment of alcohol disorders include disulfiram, naltrexone, and acamprosate as a treatment of the core pathology, with the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors being considered a first-line pharmacological treatment almost all over the world. I mean, even in the Europe and America, because sometimes they differ, but SSRI are common in all these countries. Positive impact on drinking pattern in patients who have been given SSRI in doses higher than those prescribed for depressive illness, which is a very, very important perspective. And of course, we have to look at the drug-drug reaction, we have to look at the liver pathology and the general condition. But generally, SSRI in the higher, and SSRI also being identifies as control, as having the impulse control, that is a drinking or the craving control also. Type of alcoholic who have less severe depression and late onset alcohol dependence, even in that, SSRI found to be effective. Among patients with major depression who were not given a prescription for an antidepressant medication at the time of discharge from the inpatient alcohol treatment, 100% resume alcohol use within ensuing 4 months. Now, this is very important for us to note that you just can't leave alcoholics if you have a little suspicion of depression. In fact, the aggressive suspicion of the depression is a good idea. The potential utility of employing antidepressant medications early in treatment is must. There are not many studies on that, but people clinically approve of this. Combination treatment can lead to higher rates of abstinence from alcohol in the clinical practice. Prevention interventions like we have to educating primary care physicians, general public, community, gatekeepers, different gatekeepers, because they have to refer the patient, as early as possible. Otherwise, the both depression and alcoholism become chronic, then they're difficult to treat. Screening for individual at high risk is very important in terms of if the depression is there, we're finding out both suicide and alcoholism events in the past. In the alcoholism, finding out the depressive and the suicide events. In fact, in alcoholism, identified suicide event is a very important perspective to give us, lead to understand depression or find out the depression in clinical practice. Pharmacotherapy, antidepressant including selective SSRI, sometimes antipsychotics for the behavior control in mild doses. Psychotherapy are very important. Alcoholism programs, cognitive behavior therapy, problem solving therapy, impulse control. For impulse control, there are various therapies which we need to give. Follow-up care of the suicide attempts is very important. Besides alcohol or depression, restriction of access to lethal means, the relatives need to be trained, because all of us have experienced that many relatives probably faltered in this and we have lost the patients. Media reporting of guidelines for suicide is very essential. So key point is it is a majorly significant challenges in this particular pathology in the depression, alcohol along with the suicide as a symptom. An integrated approach can be efficacious. Ongoing evaluation and treatments are provided under one roof, and that's the reason why the treating physician also has got good judgment about what is happening, what is changing, when alcohol relapse will happen, when the recurrent depression is coming in the picture. Utilizing antidepressant medication in conjunction with psychosocial therapies may augment overall treatment efficacy, and combining and tailoring. This is very important. Tailoring means you have to be motivational enhancement therapies, cognitive therapies, and 12-step facilitation is a very important. Refer to patients, this is in general, but I think this is where we have to understand the intensity of all these disorders, and these are the killing disorders. Depression is a killing disorder, alcohol is a killing disorder, and suicide is a symptom of the that. So we being little more alert, more keen in understanding and looking at these two disorders, as a twin diagnosis, and we have to be assertive in dealing with it. Let us look at the depression little later. Is not a good idea. We have to be really positive, identify the depression, and be familiar with the history, the family history, the genetic dynamics, everything about the patient. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for insightful talk. While treating any alcoholic patient, we have to understand all these points, all the dynamics of the patient, his personality, his social background, his depression, and we have to diagnose his underlying mental health condition. Thanks for excellent presentation. Our second topic is drug addiction, depression, and suicide. As in alcohol, drug addiction is also causing a lot of problem to a person, and person's career is ruined. There are changes in behavior, there are irritability, violence, aggression, family disturbances, everything is there. If we see the opioid is increasing the mortality by suicide by around 13 times more than a normal person. Same with the cannabis. Cannabis is causing a lot of psychological issues like psychosis, mood disorders, anxiety, and indirectly they are causing depressive disorders and suicide. Cocaine is one of the exceptional things. Sometimes people use cocaine along with alcohol, and there are high chances they will die by suicide. So we welcome for this talk Dr. Nilesh Shah sir. He's a versatile speaker. Dr. Nilesh Shah sir is a professor and head of the Department of Psychiatry in Sion Hospital and Medical College. He is working there since last 32 years with Sion, and in current COVID situation also, he has not stopped his work. He's continuing his work in the hospital. He is having a lot of experience with many cases of drug addictions, depression, psychosis, all. He is married, he is having 2 daughters, and he likes to watch movies, like to travel and roadside food. And he says he's over anxious, but I don't feel he's over anxious. And he is having special memories about childhood. When he was in third, he was class monitor. He got third prize in running when he was in 6th, and he acted in drama when he was in 9th. So welcome, Dr. Nilesh Shah sir. Kindly start. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Amar. I'm very happy to be over here, and I'm very grateful to you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. Okay. So I think there was a wonderful lecture by Dr. Shubha Parker, and as she mentioned, the equation between alcohol, depression, and suicide is that people taking alcohol are at a higher risk of depression. People who have depression are at a higher risk for alcohol dependence. People with alcohol dependence are at higher risk of suicide. People with depression are at a higher risk of suicide. And if we have both alcohol dependence and depression, the risk of suicide is very, very high. So that is the equation between alcohol, depression, and suicide. As far as drug, depression, and suicide is concerned, the equation is little different. And drugs, depression, and suicide, I link all together by an independent variable, and which is that independent variable, it will become evident from my case presentation. So here is my case. This Rose, 24-year-old female patient, and she was admitted in intensive care unit for the overdose of sleeping tablets. According to her boyfriend, Ronald, both had escaped from home with good amount of cash and jewelry a few months back and were had settled in small beachside motel in Goa. Now this we see quite commonly every day. We see this kind of cases where boy and a girl fall in love and they escape and they settle down somewhere. As a part of curiosity, experimentation and have fun, they were consuming alcohol and variety of drugs like buttons, that is sleeping pills, cannabis, charas, ganja, bhang, opium, heroin, brown sugar, cocaine. As you know, Goa is a heaven for people who have drug addiction. So once they are in Goa, they have access to all these drugs and alcohol, which are easily available and not very expensive, and they had lots of money, so they started using this. Now, obviously, because they were not working, after a few months, they ran out of their cash and jewelry. And in order to survive in Goa, they started drug peddling. So many of these young adolescent people get involved in drug peddling, where in order to fulfill their own drug addiction, they start selling the drugs, and whatever profit they make, they buy that money to take their own drugs. So they started drug peddling and they were caught by police. So after they were interrogated by the police inspector who suspected them of peddling, they left Goa and came to Bombay to their respective homes in order to avoid the arrest and the legal action. So they came back. Now, luckily, their parents were very nice. They took them back. And after returning to Mumbai, they got married and they had a child with the support from their parents, who helped them to get rented accommodation. Now, what happened after this? Somehow the Rose, the girl, could abstain from drugs and alcohol. But her friend and now husband, Ronald, continued taking alcohol and drugs even in Mumbai. This created frequent rift between them, and during one such quarrel, she consumed all the available sleeping pills with intention to end her life. So when they came to us on further inquiry, it was learned that she had been in outpatient and inpatient treatment since her adolescence many times. There was a history of childhood sexual abuse, self-mutilation number of times, several suicidal attempts and episodic violent behavior, and without significant improvement in her symptoms or psychosocial functioning. So what are we looking at? Here, the patient had typical symptoms of depression, and number of times she was admitted for depression. So obviously, because she attempted suicide, she was very depressed. Her diagnosis was major depression, and this is called RBD, recurrent brief depressive episodes, which we see in these people who have cluster B personality disorder. And they indulge in what we call hostile, violent type of depression, and they usually indulge in multiple suicide attempts. So first diagnosis, major depression, and RBD, recurrent brief depressive episodes, is very, very common. And obviously these patients indulge in multiple suicide attempts. All of these people also has substance use disorder, and usually it is polysubstance use disorder. Whatever is available, whatever is new, whatever is different, they want to try it out. So they don't stick to one. Patients with alcohol use disorder usually stick to only alcohol. They don't change their addiction. While here, majority of them start with smoking, tobacco, go on to cannabis, and then go on to other drugs, sleeping tablets, cocaine, marijuana, whatever they get at MDMA, ecstasy, whatever is available, they experiment and they end up using multiple different types of drugs. And what links all these three things? The depression, the substance use and suicide is underlying cluster B personality disorder. So whenever you see a patient who has these three things, episodes, recurrent brief depressive episodes of depression, substance use disorder, and multiple suicidal attempts or attempts at harming oneself, think about an underlying link, that is cluster B personality disorder. So what happens, we have these three areas of the brain: frontal lobes, temporal lobes, and deep limbic system. Now in these patients, basically they have what we call temporal lobe dysfunction. Temporal lobe is an interpretative cortex, and their deep limbic system is overactive because it's an emotive cortex, emotional. They are very, very emotional, and that's why they have overreaction, very emotional, mood swings. They suddenly are very happy, suddenly they are very low, and extreme mood swings they indulge into. And whenever there is external stimuli, the temporal lobe misinterprets the stimuli. And the frontal lobe, which is the executive cortex, executive functioning, which helps us to take the decision when I or you are faced with this kind of situation where we have to, we are under stress, or somebody would offer us drug, our prefrontal cortex is very strong and it would say, no, nothing doing. I will say no to drugs. And even if somebody forces me, I will not take drugs under any circumstances. But because their prefrontal cortex, the superego, what we call, is not very, very strong, they yield to temptation. And because they yield to their temptation, they indulge in this multiple drug usage. So basically, these people who have cluster B personality disorder have a kind of underlying temporal lobe dysfunction. So their temporal lobes are not functioning up to the mark. Their limbic system is very, very sensitive, and their prefrontal cortex are very, very weak, what we call poor superego development. And that's why whenever you have temporal lobe dysfunction, you indulge in aggression, internally or externally directed. Aggression may be internally directed, where you indulge in self-harming behavior, forearm slashing behavior, deliberate self-harm, and suicide. You get dark or violent thoughts, emotional instability, recurrent brief episodes of depression. And this depression is little different type of depression, what we call hostile and violent type of depression. This is not typical retarded or agitated depression, but this is a depression of personality disorder. And they also indulge in drug abuse, multiple drugs. By nature, they are very, very sensitive, and sensitivity to slights. Little bit happens, something happens which they don't like, they lose their temper, they become violent, they become aggressive, and all of them have mild paranoia. So in the house, they keep on suspecting. If somebody is talking, they feel they are talking about me. If somebody is laughing, they feel they are mocking at, those people are mocking at them. So there is a mild paranoia going on. They also have difficulty in recognizing facial expressions and difficulty in decoding vocal annotations. They also have difficulty in social skills. That's why lots of problem with interpersonal relationship. They cannot maintain interpersonal relationship. They get either over involved, and they kind of divide everything into black and white. If you are good, you are all good, and if you are bad, everything is bad. So on one experience, one instance, they will kind of be happy, or they will break up. Anxiety or fear for no particular reasons. They have these feelings of deja vu, jamais vu. They have period of spaciness and confusion. And many of them have this religious and moral preoccupation. So they keep on, many of them change their religion, and that kind of phenomena they have. So how do we deal with these patients? Obviously, counseling is very, very important, and usually this cluster B personality disorder, who usually also have associated major depression, drug addiction, and multiple suicidal attempts. Counseling is very, very important, and specifically DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, where we don't challenge, we don't bring out their effort, but we say, okay, you through the mobile. That was one way of dealing with it. What is the other way of dealing with this situation? Second important thing, what we have seen is keep them meaningfully occupied. Any number of this borderline personality disorder, cluster B personality disorders, as long as they are meaningfully occupied and they are away from their family members, they are very good. They are functioning well. But as soon as they are at home in a situation like lockdown, COVID, problem starts and they keep on fighting with their family members. Usually, we give them these medications. We usually give them one antidepressants for depression, usually fluoxetine in the dose to 20 to 80 milligrams, or nowadays escitalopram 10 to 20 milligrams per day. Antipsychotic, because the depression is aggressive, hostile kind of depression, and lots of aggression in their behavior, externally as well as internally directed. So for that, we can give olanzapine or risperidone, which are largely used. And if they are very, very violent, very aggressive, not getting control with olanzapine, risperidone, I have put many of them on clozapine. And finally, they are on some mood stabilizer because they have mood upswings and down. So wide mood variation, impulsivity, irritability, for these kind of situations, one of the most safe and well-tolerated medication is oxcarbazepine and carbamazepine. So carbamazepine, oxcarbazepine can be widely used in these patients, particularly when they have multiple suicidal attempts and self-harming behavior. Lithium is a drug of choice. Valproate has been used in these patients. Lamotrigine has been very useful in these patients. And for drug addiction, we put them on baclofen and naltrexone. So counseling, one antidepressant, one antipsychotic, a mood stabilizer, and anti-craving agent is required for management of these patients who have all the three: depression, substance use, and suicide. The common link in these majority of these patients is underlying cluster B personality disorder. So thank you very much. Stay healthy, helpful, and calm.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for nice presentation. Another angle is important, that personality. Cluster B personality is very common with the addictions and depression and suicidal thoughts. Thanks, sir. Now, the current hot topic: behavioral addiction, depression, and suicide, especially in children and adolescents. Just heard the news: a 16-year-old TikTok star ended her life by suicide. So it is troubling to all the parents around that every child is stick to mobile. They are used to game addictions, then social media addictions, lot of busy in making videos. They are always busy with the mobiles. Also the older adults, they are with the gaming, game station, PlayStation. Even Sushant Singh, I heard a news that before his day, he was on the PlayStation. Also, there was gambling, pornography, all types of behavioral problems are there, and they are making too much problem. These behavioral addictions are almost similar to the drug addiction. And similar to drug addiction, they are causing depressive symptoms, they are causing anxiety, they are causing suicidal tendencies, and ultimately vicious cycle sometimes gets set. Let's invite Dr. Bhushan Shukla, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. He is one of the best child and adolescent psychiatrists in India. He has done MBBS, MD, DNB, and MRC Psych. He is trained in India as well as UK and having vast experience in children and adolescents. Since 2000, he is working on child sex abuse program, child sex abuse prevention program, Dr. Shukla's training program for prevention of abuse, No Go Tell, is also featured in Amir Khan's Satyamev Jayate. The program is adopted by several NGOs and government agencies also. He advocates overall mental health well-being. He works for various schools also, colleges, family court, and also juvenile justice service. He is also having good private practice and doing various parenting programs. So Dr. Shukla, please give us insight in the behavioral addictions and what we can do to prevent them and how to treat it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Amar. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I'm very happy to be in company of stalwarts of our specialty, Dr. Parker and Dr. Shah. So I consider this as a great honor to be with all of you. Let us start with the presentation now. I hope you are able to see the full screen there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to rush through a few topics here.
Put that into presentation mode.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not working that way. Let me give that a try again.
You can go up and
For some reason, it's playing up. Let me try it. It will happen.
Sir, press F5. F5.
Yeah, there you go. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So you have heard about the medical management and the cognitive management of addictions. I'm going to focus a little bit more on creating the environment where this de-addiction is possible. So let us look at that. We always talk about the cause of addiction, and that is, we know that it is a complicated combination of what the person, the society, and the substance bring to the table of addiction. And there has been a long-standing debate on some people insisting on harm reduction as adequate treatment, whereas other bunch talking about complete abstinence. When we talk about tech addictions, I think all of us have now reasonably accepted that harm reduction is what we are looking at. Total abstinence, particularly for adolescents who are born in the digital age and their education is still going on, or they're going to require digital services even for the rest of their life, total abstinence will be slightly overboard. So harm reduction is what we are looking at. So when the child or the adolescent is brought to you, the first question I would ask is that why do you want to have the help now? Because we know that stuff has been going on for months, if not years, before the family approaches us. So this is a slightly family therapy kind of question, which will tell you what are the panic buttons of the family and which have been pressed. It is good to ask them what do they exactly want out of the treatment, because establishing rational expectations from treatment is one of the first jobs. One more thing that I definitely want to know is who calls the shots in the family. It can many times happen that the person who's really dominant or who makes all the decisions, if they are not part of the initial treatment discussion, they are going to sabotage your treatment by becoming the dissenting voice. And this becomes very complicated when we are talking about a young person. Then another thing that I want to know about this family system is that what is their pain tolerance? How much of difficult behavior, how much of difficulties they can tolerate, because we all know that treating any kind of addiction is not a straight line of recovery. It goes through lots of turmoil. And can the family handle this turmoil? Do they have a track record of doing that? One more thing that I want to know is how much of autonomy is already acquired by this young person. How much of money do they control? How much of time do they control? How do they manage their day-night cycle? Which kind of family members are getting dominated by them? Who are they still afraid of? How do they work? So this autonomy is something that is very important for me, because the more the autonomy the person has already gathered, the child has already gathered, more difficult the treatment is going to be. And the third thing, which is extremely relevant for our today's topic of suicide, is that exactly what the family is afraid of. Because we know that Indians are good at hiding their fear, at least to start with. They will nod their head, they will say yes to everything, they will agree with you. But when they come back for follow-up after 8 days or 10 days, or when the patient is admitted, you find that your treatment plan is being sabotaged by somebody. We all doctors usually react with a lot of anger to that. And though which is okay from our side, it does not help the treatment. So what I would like to do as very first part of the treatment is to address fears of the family. That what are they really afraid of? Many times they are worried about expression of anger of that young person because they have experienced it beforehand. They are seriously worried about self-harm and suicide, particularly for next quite a few months. Hopefully, there will be no more celebrity suicides, but we have had too many of them already. Parents are really scared. Already in last 1.5 weeks, I have seen at least one child brought to me every day. So 10 so far with serious suicidal ideation, not exactly as a copycat suicide, because they were not followers of the stars, but suddenly after reading all about it, they started believing that this is actually a way out of their difficulty and they might consider it. So this is something that is very high on families' mind, and that needs to be addressed right at the beginning. They are also worried about damaged relationship, that they do believe that one of the side effects of mental health treatment is that their relationship with the child is going to get damaged somehow. They may also be worried about loss of face in the society when the news gets out that the child is taking treatment. They're also worried about, will your treatment actually make things worse for my family? Because they have some experiences, they have heard some stories. So all these fears need to be brought out in open and discussed and allayed before we can attempt any kind of treatment there. Now we start intervention planning. So you should have separate planning meetings with all the stakeholders. These can be grandparents, these can be parents. Sometimes the school is involved in that. Sometimes even a helpful tuition teacher can be there. But all these people need to be brought to the table to discuss exactly how they can help. Then we need to have a common minimum program for family members. That exactly what do they expect, what are they willing to do? Because ultimately the weakest link of the family will decide how far this is going to go. So can we bolster up that weakest link? Can we make pairs of them? Can you actually generate support system in the family itself? This is something important. There should be no contradiction in aims of what needs to be achieved between family members, and a clear verbal contract with clear assent from all the family members is really important. Because somehow people do still feel that they are bound to the word that they have given in public. So everybody committing to what they are going to do, how they are going to react, from whom they are going to ask for help, what are the steps planned, that is something that really goes a long way. Second part that I work on is that I give roles and responsibility to specific family members. So who is going to handle the angry part? Who's going to handle the anxious part? We know that different people have different level of empathy and different personality strengths in the family. So doing that assessment and actually allocating those roles to them and teaching them skills to actually handle that is something that really works. So we assess the weaknesses and the strengths of the family system, arrange it accordingly. It is literally like you're the captain of the fielding team and you're arranging your bowler, your fielders in every such way that you're going to get the batsman out as quickly as possible. And if not, you're not going to get them out. Like if you can't get this abstinence, then at least you're going to restrict how many runs they can make. And unless the entire team is on board, this gets difficult. Sometimes it takes up to 5 or 6 family meetings, excluding the person who needs treatment, to arrange all of this. Then there is, of course, the question of whether to admit or not to admit. This will totally depend on what are the support needs of the family. If the family cannot support the child or the young person in the house in the initial phases of severe withdrawals from technology, then maybe admission is a better idea to start with. You may also wait for a crisis to happen and then go in with the option of admission for the family, which may be more acceptable to them at that point of time. Expected severity of withdrawal symptoms, which will be apparent from the past attempts made by the family, will also guide you on admission and abilities of your staff members. Because most of the facilities are geared for adult psychiatry patients, particularly people with severe drug addiction or bipolar disorder or chronic psychosis. So they may not be truly ready to accommodate a 15 or a 16-year-old there. And then now there are other legal questions because of Mental Health Act as well. So considering all of that and abilities of your staff, the decision to admit should be taken. Now, what is the phase 1 of treatment? These are the initial withdrawal times where support either in person if the person is admitted, or if they are taking it on OPD basis, then frequent telephonic contact, 2 or 3 short telephone calls in the day initiated from your side can actually help. And these are preemptive strikes. So we typically know that the crisis happens typically around 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening. So calling up at 7 o'clock for 5 minutes will save you 1.5 hours on phone at 10 o'clock in the night. So go ahead, pick up that phone, plan that, and execute that call. I will not go into details of medicines. You all are very familiar with that. That has been discussed in detail. Again, discussing specific activities, mindfulness, specific breathing techniques to help manage those withdrawal symptoms, particularly irritability and anxiety, definitely helps. Ma'am has already talked about motivation enhancing work, so I will not go into details of that. Phase 2 is mainly about using motivational interviewing techniques, but at the same time, firmly declining all the renegotiations. Now, this is something very important because adolescents who have become addicted to technology have over the period gathered all the autonomy in their hand, and they're excellent at renegotiations. They agree for 1 hour use of the gadget, but before the parents know it, they're actually staying up all through the night. So not getting into negotiations is something that is very important. Whatever plan or contract is put in place right at the beginning should be stuck to all the time. So communication in the family needs to be managed, so there will be no negotiations. Child to adult communication and how the adult responds to that is something that is very important. Then we move on to the third phase, which is about consolidation. After the initial crisis is over, that is when we get a chance to work with this young person and actually do hands-on skills training. This is again a more extended version of what we do in phase 1. In phase 1, they have used a ready-to-use kind of techniques, but in phase 3, we go more in depth and work on their basic personality issues, assertiveness training, helping them develop alternative behaviors to replace or reduce addiction is something that we work on. And then we are in the final phase, typically after 3rd or 4th week of treatment, where lots of patients, lots of praise and positive feedback needs to be given, because this particular young person has received so much of hell from everybody for being addicted to technology that inculcating praise and inculcating positive feedback for family becomes a very, very crucial issue there. Then we take the skill building to next level where they actually try out those skills in real life and we help them do troubleshooting as well. See, this is something that is really important. We all know importance of psychological intervention and social skills building. But social skills building is not done as a one-way lecture in a clinic room where the patient is sitting 4 feet away from you at the end of a long table. This is something which is very much hands-on. So initial principles are discussed, basic skills are taught, they are practiced right in front of you. Then they practice those skills with other patients or family members. Then they go out in the society and test out those skills and you are available for troubleshooting. So unless multiple cycles of troubleshooting are done, the skill is not really taken over by the patient. And this takes fairly long time and one should be ready for that. And the last part that needs to be managed is the change in family dynamics. Now that this person has gone back, you all are aware of changing family dynamics after drug or alcohol de-addiction. Similar stuff happens with technology de-addiction as well. Families' volatility, families' anger, or families' comeback at the young person needs to be blocked very effectively. Sometimes family meetings are necessary for that. Does this mean that they will live happily ever after? Yes, in up to 1/3 of cases, it is really possible when the child hasn't developed too much of autonomy and the family is still willing to take things on board. In another 1/3 cases, you will be able to do significant harm reduction and reduce the friction and deadly outcomes in the family like suicide or serious self-harm. And in 1/3 of the cases, well, you refer them on to your competitor and that is how you survive. Okay, so that is where it all stops. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhushan sir. Technology is so much useful, but sometimes it has become headache. I think in this COVID situation, next year we will see the results of technology, because currently people are using continuously computer, laptop, mobile, everything. So all types of addictions, we have to understand the neurobiology, the personality, the depressive or psychological issues combined, and all dynamics. If we understand, then only we can give best result to the addictions patients and we can prevent lot of suicide. Now we'll start with the question answers. I will ask first question to Dr. Shubhangi Parkar madam. Dr. Vikrant Patankar, Aurangabad, has asked one question. How long can extended withdrawal can last?
Extended withdrawal goes beyond the stipulated period of 7 to 10 days, they can go up to a month also. And remember that there is a more biological troubles, more medical pathology. So sometimes, those symptoms keep going ahead, and you have to be very careful, because we generally calculate that those days, but it's not easy with the person who already have huge pathologies.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Second question to Dr. Nilesh Shah, sir. Drug dependence from Dr. Umesh Nagapurkar, Nashik. Drug dependence is the most of the time associated with some psychiatric comorbidity. Which is the most common amongst depression, bipolar, or personality disorder, or any other psychiatric disorder mostly associated with drug dependence?
Thank you, Dr. Umesh Nagapurkar, for the question. Most common in my experience and in our clinic, what we see is personality disorder. Whenever any adolescent is brought to our OPD, and parents usually say that we have brought him and he has a habit of taking weed or cannabis or MD, anything, I look at him and I realize that he has multiple tattoos on his bodies, and look at the forearm, and he has multiple cut marks on his forearm. And the way he behaves, the way he sits, the way he talks arrogantly, and why have you brought me here, and is it possible? And then he will call somebody, his friends, and say, see, my parents have brought me over here, without realizing that he is in the hospital. And we can pick up that this is a cluster B personality disorder. We don't need much history. So most common is cluster B personality disorder. The second common is I have seen schizophrenia. Patients have a borderline personality disorder and schizophrenia and substance use disorder. And in fact, earlier, if you remember, borderline personality disorder was called as ambulatory schizophrenia. So schizophrenia patients I have seen taking multiple drugs and multiple suicidal attempts. Bipolar mood disorder, some people think that cluster B personality disorder is also included under what we call bipolar spectrum disorder. But bipolar spectrum disorder or bipolar mood disorder, I don't see so much in adolescent. This is little older people and clear-cut episodes. And substance use usually we see only during that phase. So during a manic phase, he takes substances, then he is fine. Then again, depressive phase, he might take substances and in fine. And majority of them use alcohol, not these hard drugs like cannabis, weed, etc. So thank you for asking me this question.
Thank you, sir. Next question to Dr. Bhushan Shukla, sir. Dr. Bhalchand Kalmek, Pune, has asked one question. As we are heading towards increased use of online clinical practice, what precaution we should take to prevent screen addiction for ourselves?
I think that is the most self-preserving question that I have heard, and it's absolutely to be welcome. I'll tell you what I do, because I don't think there has been any study on screen addiction in psychiatrists yet. But obviously, we are not much different from our patients fundamentally, are we? So we are exposed to the same dangers. What I do is that there are clear times in the day that I have created which are phone free. This includes actually putting the phone away at least half an hour or 1 hour before bedtime. Sometimes I do miss that. And not picking up the phone as first thing in the morning. I try to have at least my breakfast before I have had a look at the phone. And the typical instruction given to all the patients is that I'm not available on WhatsApp. Okay, you need to call me. If it is an emergency, make a phone call. And patients usually don't abuse that facility. In the daytime also, I have a fairly good track record of creating 30 minutes or 40 minutes of phone-free time where I actually put my phone on a mute and put it away and read paper books. So creating these small islands for ourselves and reducing the panic of being constantly connected is something that is worth a try, I would say. So far, I have been successful. If the lockdown continues to extend and the practice continues to remain e-practice, then I don't know what will happen after 6 months, but let's wish good or best luck to all of us.
Thanks, sir. Next question to ma'am. Anjali Deshpande from Pune has asked how to handle suicidal tendencies in seniors as she's working with the senior citizens.
handling with the senior is not different than adults basically, but the issue of problems, the physical, medical problems, psychosocial problems, and psychiatric morbidities. Those three things we have to keep in the mind, because whether the suicide is just the symptom of anything of this, maybe there is a elderly abuse, maybe there is uncontrolled diabetes, which is a chronic lifestyle disease, or if there is associated depression. So we have to and we have to be a little more sensitive on this issue, how we handle. It's not just it's not just a talk therapy. What we do is make their key relatives, make their environment alert and aware, and bring in some kind of soothing communication, because elderly people, a communication style will matter. They need that, and that's what we have to, these three factors, and of course the strengthening or empowering environment, which is a very important family environment. Yes. Peer, I don't know, I mean, how we can organize about the peers, basically. I mean, I am little bit in trouble now. So many elderly people keep calling me. I almost have become peer, and I'm reluctant to become the elderly peer now.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question to Dr. Nilesh Shah, sir. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Dharmendra Kendre from Pune is asking, any comment on addiction and homicides? Also, he has added one more question. Do you think pathological drinkers are more susceptible for suicidal or homicidal attempts?
So let me start with the first question. What was the first question?
Homicide and addiction.
Yeah, homicide and addiction. Yes, absolutely. I will particularly focus on drug addiction. And as I said, this majority of patients who are adolescent indulge in drug addiction. And why I call them cluster B, because they also have traits of antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And if it's a female, they also have histrionic traits. So many times it's a lethal combination of borderline and antisocial personality disorders, and they have a very poor control over their anger. And they really need anger management. And at a slightest provocation, they lose their temper and they throw things, become violent, aggressive. And there have been instances where they have either accidentally harmed somebody to the extent that that person has died, or purposely on occasion. In fact, day before yesterday, we had this patient who has this personality disorder, and his friend called him that so-and-so misbehaved with me. And he went over there, fought with that person and almost killed him. Luckily, his father went behind him and separated him, but otherwise he would have killed that person. And many times they pick up some unnecessary quarrel. This boy, his friends, building people told him that since you have a COVID positive state, you go to the hospital and don't enter the building. So he said, why can't I enter the building? And then he called his friend, he went and started fighting with building people. So this kind of things is very, very common. And yes, patients with cluster B personality disorder can be very, very harmful, not only to self, but to the others. They can break things and they can be homicidal. Very true. Second part of the question, pathological drinking. I'm not very sure what exactly you are referring to pathological drinking is, but there is a pathological intoxication.
Binge drinking?
Is it
Yes,
episodic binge drinking? Or because there is one thing which is called as pathological intoxication, where this homicidal tendencies have been reported, where very small quantity of alcohol and patient has an unusual reaction, which is called as pathological intoxication. So usually we get intoxicated with very, very high amount of alcohol, but these people, they are very sensitive, and that has been reported to the best of my knowledge in Japanese people, where they are genetically vulnerable, and with a very small quantity of alcohol, they develop intoxication, and to the extent that they do go into this kind of a state, fugue state, where they run and travel long distance and kill somebody in that rage, and then they will have complete amnesia for this. So pathological intoxication, yes.
Yes. Ma'am, would you like to add some comment?
Yes, I mean, what we have seen the patients who have been violent and who had been in the legal custody, and there this particular issue of, I had been expert witness in the court also for this particular issue of pathological intoxication, because his wife was the two patients, in one case the daughter, and they were, the whole issue was what he has done was a pathological intoxication, and they were asking for the concession in the punishment, basically. But that exists because with the proper history it was there. So I think we have to identify. It's very difficult when it gets into the legal domain, how you can, because there are no particular scales or something like that. You have to be really sharp with your clinical and do all the testing, which is a very important. And as Nilesh said rightly, we have to have the personality assessment in a very proper perspective. But in these two patients, they were well adjusted personality. Pathological intoxication, I have done even MRI in these cases, just to find out something which probably triggers this intoxication because of damage into the brain or something like that. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question to Dr. Bhushan Shukla, sir. Dr. Nivedita from Pune. She's asking, suicide is not common in game addiction. Is it correct? One is low or high, other on high dopamine.
See, I wouldn't really take it to one neurotransmitter and one behavioral outcome there, because I don't think we have reached that stage of scientific finesse yet. Suicide and gaming addiction is, again, gaming addiction may be the final pin that gets the ball rolling. That is possible, but I haven't come across any specific literature that gaming addiction makes one particularly more prone to suicide.
Okay.
I have a question on this too, Bhushan, because in alcohol, even Nilesh can see alcoholism we look at in terms of the suicide equivalent or chronic suicide. I have no idea in the gaming, especially, whether such a concept is there, because it is a behavior what you got beautifully out in terms of the behavior.
Blue whale game, there was a particular game which is called as blue whale, and in that systematically the person was kind of brainwashed, and then he was asked that, okay, it's like truth and dare, can you slash your wrist and show it to your friends? So he will kind of do it and he'll get praises for it, and then they go at little higher level, and can you do this, escape from your house for 3 days, and everybody will kind of praise. And in that, the final state was jumping from the top of the building or cutting, slashing your. So that was only one gaming addiction, blue whale games, which people were thinking. And I think somebody who had kind of created that game, when he was interviewed, he specifically said that he has created this game to eliminate this people who are weak-minded and become submissive to this extent. So yes, only I remember this incidents, which I think most of us know.
I think if we are talking about the common games which most of the youngsters play, particularly either first-person shooters or strategy games where 2 gangs or 3 gangs are going to fight with each other with multiple virtual weapons, then I doubt if suicide is a big part of that, because socialization is always involved there. Most of them have online communities and they do communicate with each other. So I at least haven't come across any specific reference to that.
Yeah, we have 2 games, PUBG. PUBG is everybody's playing PUBG and Dota 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we are dealing in de-addiction center, this type of people, and sometimes we are hearing news also in the newspaper. If we parents stop their games, they can threat them, or impulsively they can do something. So that is the problem with the people. Next question to ma'am. Dr. Ravindra Patil from North Goa, psychiatrist. Is there any antidepressant which can accelerate the suicidality in multiple substance abuse or dependent? Any particular antidepressant?
No, I think something which they talk about is SSRIs,
Yes.
and amongst that they talk about fluoxetine, but that is in general, not in the, the people who have the addictions, multiple addictions. However, this question is very interesting when I just try to listen to this question, basically because, see, the drug addiction probably have got, eventually a lot of cognitive changes, discriminatory effect on the brain, before probably it goes into the cannabis like a motivation or something. But there is a disinhibitory. I mean, we have done the PET scan studies, in the opioid, and we have seen those particular track. So maybe I really do not know. I'm thinking it right now. Maybe Nilesh and Bhushan also can think, adding something like SSRI, maybe the further, causing a little bit disinhibition before it starts. I don't know what Nilesh and Bhushan has to say, but I like this question.
Yeah. It's a black box warning for all antidepressants, particularly when we are using it in adolescent. And initially it started with fluoxetine, because fluoxetine was the first SSRI. And in British Journal of Psychiatry, they reported 6 cases in which after starting fluoxetine, there is increase in suicidal ideation, and adolescents had attempted suicide. Subsequently, they have followed up these cases, and they have actually found that what is happening is that 2 things, which was earlier also reported with tricyclic drugs. One was that when the person is severely depressed, there is a psychomotor retardation. And that's why even if he has suicidal ideation, he's not acting on his idea because of the psychomotor retardation. Means even he's so tired or he's so depressed that he doesn't even want to take that initiative to get up and pick up a bottle of poison or take a overdose of medication. Now, when you start antidepressants, there is an improvement in depression, and unfortunately, the psychomotor retardation improves before the ideation improves. So if the ideation remains and the psychomotor retardation improves, he might attempt suicide, and that was well reported even not only for SSRI, but even in the case of tricyclic antidepressant drugs. The phenomena which was reported with SSRI was that SSRI, when there is a sudden increase in serotonin, it also stimulates the postsynaptic serotonergic receptors excessively, which causes agitation and sudden increase in anxiety. And sudden anxiety and increase in agitation have been reported as one of the common side effects in adolescents on SSRI. I think almost in my clinical practice, I see 1 in 20 patients who do not tolerate SSRI and say, after taking SSRI, I felt uneasy or anxious or agitated. And that happens more frequently in adolescents. And during that agitation, they are at a higher risk, particularly have the underlying personality problem. They are at a higher risk of attempting suicide. No wonder when Vilazodone was launched. So Vilazodone not only increases the serotonin, but also simultaneously blocks the postsynaptic 5-HT2 receptors. So that was, they were promoting that because it blocks postsynaptic 5-HT receptors simultaneously, like mirtazapine, it has a less chances of suicide. So if you want adolescent and if you have a risk that he is likely to attempt suicide, in SSRI, if you have to choose instead of fluoxetine or escitalopram, you might choose Vilazodone for that matter.
Yeah, I think Sir has really covered that very well. What I typically do in practice is, if I have to prescribe an antidepressant for an adolescent, I usually ask them that which kind of side effect you think more comfortable handling. Would your family and you be able to handle agitation better or excessive sleep better? If they say that we are happy with sleeping more, then I probably would go for something which is more sleep inducing. And if they say, no, we don't want excessive sleep, but agitation is something that we are ready to manage, so then I prescribe that. So I think it is about shared responsibility as well. If you forewarn them, they can come back very disappointed after 1 week and say that, oh, but you said that and it never happened. So I think, are you going to sue me for that you didn't get side effects of the medicine that I prescribed? And then we end up laughing about it. But I think, yes, we need to warn our patients about this very clearly. We all were not doing this 10 years ago, but I think now that needs to become a part of standard clinical practice.
Yes, sir. Bhushan sir, out of the way, one question. What is your, usually starting antidepressant in adolescent is always, we have to think a lot because there is chances of bipolarity and other things, irritability, whatever. What is your plan of starting the drugs?
So see, unless we are talking about suicidal depression or very severe psychomotor retardation, I typically do not start antidepressant at first phase for sure. It is invariably a fairly extended assessment, a discussion with the patient, and again giving them option that you have an option of psychotherapy available. You have an option of purely starting on medications, and you have an option of combination. What would you like to have? And then sitting down to discuss with them what each can achieve and what the time frame that we are looking at. My experience is that people do like to start with therapy, but most of them don't stick with that beyond first 2 weeks. Particularly if you're dealing with more severe kind of depression, then they do come back and they want to start on a combination or start give medicines a try. But I think it is better to make it a choice by the patient or the family. It is absolutely okay to wait for 15 days if we are taking adequate precautions, particularly suicide warnings, and then you have family on your side. So I usually don't reach for prescription right on the first consultation for sure.
Yes, thank you, sir. Dr. Nilisha, Dr. Rakesh from Good English, he's a psychiatrist. He has added one comment. Dr. Nilisha, sir, very good slide regarding neurobiology of cluster B personality. First time came to know about neurobiology of cluster B personality will help to understand behavior of this patient. Also, he has asked one question. Kindly give how to handle the survivors of suicide. Sometimes they are frustrated and how to handle them.
It is interesting to know that suicide attempt itself has an antidepressant effect.
Yes.
And Shubha would agree with me because she is a suicide expert. We have any number of patients we have seen, and particularly these patients with personality disorder, drug addiction, and they say that there is a buildup of those emotions. It becomes very heavy, and when they slash their wrist and the blood comes out, that relief comes. And many of them said, I have attempted suicide and now my depression has gone. So first of all, we have seen many number of young adolescents coming, and when you say, oh, you are depressed, says, no, I was depressed, but after attempting suicide and now I'm happy that I have survived. Now in this kind of situation, you have to see two things. So what I usually do, if there are definite symptoms of depression, and I feel that yes, he has a depression and personality disorder, I start medication, what we call supervised medication. So we discuss with the patient, explain him that you have a less serotonin in the brain, and that's why your ability to cope with stressful situation is compromised. It's like your car, you have run out of petrol in your car. So you have to push your car. How long you can push? Not very long, but you will fill the petrol. So we'll give you some medicines which will act as a petrol, but finally you are going to drive your car. So you will be able to drive in a better way if it's you have enough petrol in your car. Otherwise you will have to push. So we explain, and then we take one of the relatives into confidence and supervised medication. So if it's a depression, we give antidepressant, usually escitalopram, with clonazepam to prevent agitation. Lithium is one of my favorite drug, and I have said it on many occasions. East or west, lithium is the best. So that is and lithium specifically has anti-suicidal effect, and particularly in personality disorder, when I see that there is a recurrent brief depressive episodes and multiple suicide attempts, I am very fond of starting lithium after discussing the pros and cons of lithium. In psychotic patients, clozapine has again been reported to have specific anti-suicidal effect. and all time our favorite is ECT. So electroconvulsive therapy is very, very useful when active suicidal ideations are there. And latest in the field is ketamine. Ketamine has been found to be very, very useful in suicidal ideations, particularly in young adolescent people who are exam going. Suppose he comes to you on Friday and says he is suicidal and Monday is his exam. What do you do? Because you can't put him on ECT because Monday he won't be able to appear in his exam if you give him ECT. So there are case reports published in Indian Journal of Psychiatry. There are guidelines where actively suicidal patient, you can rapidly control his suicidal ideation by giving ketamine. And now the way we give ECT, we have started giving ketamine for this specific indication, 0.5 milligram per kg body weight in 100 ml of saline over a period of 40 minutes. And very good results. So these are the few things which you can do for
Ma'am, you want to add some points?
No. I know what Nilesh does. Nilesh is with ECT, and when I want to try this, and if I am not too convinced, always I can tell all the people, all my colleagues there, that don't hesitate in such a cases to take second opinion from your colleagues. Please actively do that. I have done all my life and will keep doing. When I find difficulty, when I feel blocked, I always feel that, Nilesh has got better intelligence at that time at least.
Yes.
So do that. Huh? This is one thing which I want to tell, that in your practice, don't be pressured, to deal with the patient when you are not comfortable. It's patient's life, especially in cases of the suicide. Make it a point that they are there in some time in a better than yourself, basically in better hands. And I have done this too often, basically when I fail, I am not the one who will give ECT, and then I have sent the patient to Sayan, to Nilesh, and he has taken care of. I think quite a few patients he has taken care of. So this is very important. The ultimate aim is to save the patient. So take your colleagues' opinion, have faith in them,
Thank you,
Thank you,
Shubha.
Amar, if yeah, there is
Don't
if
leave
there's
any.
a
Thank you, Shubha. I see you don't leave any opportunity to pass a sarcastic comment about my intelligence and my approach. Thank you very much.
Bhushan sir, you want to add?
So just one quick note about survivors of suicide. Over last year, at least 3 to 4 times actually, I have been associated or been called to consult a bunch of children who had lost a colleague to suicide. So one of the child commits suicides, and their close friends and their families get shaken up. Once a family approached me because their older one had committed suicide about a year ago. And on the death anniversary of the older brother, the younger brother was visibly shaken up, and they were worried whether he's going to go the same way as well. So family and close friends who survive the completed suicide also need help, and sometimes we actively need to seek and help them regarding that. There may be a lot of survival guilt there. There may be triggering of a lot of similar feelings. Could I have done something to stop it? So reducing their guilt, getting support for them, and helping them get on with their life is something, again, I believe is part of our job if somebody is lost to suicide. So that is something that is very much on our plate nowadays.
Yes, sir. Dr. Satish Nagargoje, psychiatrist from Mumbai, asking Dr. Bhushan Shukla, suicide predictors in adolescents with behavioral addiction, which is more common cause: impulsivity, low frustration tolerance, or depression, history of worthlessness mainly? What are the...
Yeah, I think all three of them together, the more number of indicators you have, more deadly it gets. I think it is, we know for adults that hopelessness is one of the key indicators, and for adolescents, impulsivity is another key indicator. But the more number of indicators you have there, more deadly it gets. That's the clinical experience has been. I think Shubhangi ma'am would be able to better comment on that as a suicide expert.
I think adolescent is a challenge, definitely. But what probably you need to really understand the temperament. And I agree with you, all those three issues are extremely important. And with the adolescent, one good thing which we as a psychiatrist shouldn't miss, whatever treatment we give, is the connectedness, is developing rapport, which will matter, because they are so, I think most of the patient which we have lost generally were either angry. When I see retrospectively, they were angry, or they had trouble with the therapies or whatever. But this is something which we need to do. And all those three, I think this is again a good question, very pointed. So all those three factors are important.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll take last question, and all panelists, I will request them to answer this. How to get addicted to good things in life? How can we put in the same amount of compulsiveness and desire and effort to good things like exercise, work, studying, as if they are an addiction for us? Dr. Dipali Adhav from Pune. Shubhangi, madam.
Yes, I think it is the issue of feeling happy, and that's your right. Feeling happy is your right, I believe. So I think it's not a one thing I do. I do many things. Eventually over the time, I became psychiatrist simply because I didn't want to carry on with the hardcore medicine. Let me be honest here, and I enjoyed my life because I wanted to enjoy. I wanted to read, wanted to enjoy movies, wanted to go for the drama. So all that, it is just a matter of listening to your inner voice. I think inner voice guides you nicely when you allow that voice to talk, basically. So I would do whatever I feel. So far I don't harm somebody, so that's my right, Mary Marzi, you know that's the secret of my happiness. Like my cat and I, we work like, I was always with the pets, they work with their Marzi, so we work with Mary Marzi. I have learned it from my pets.
Bhushan, sir.
So this is the book that I want to show to everybody. Unfortunately, because of camera, you're seeing the other side.
Yes,
It's
we
a
can
book
see.
called Atomic Habits by a chap called James Clear. And this has been by my bedside for a very long time now. Not because I fall off to when I start reading that book, but because I like to read it quite frequently. So I think we as psychiatrists need to look at a little bit beyond the textbooks and the pop psychology to see what the performance experts are doing all over the world. And James Clear has a very nice step-by-step plan to change ingrained habits, not only to stop bad habits, but to inculcate good habits as well. Something simple like writing regularly, or exercising regularly, or expressing gratitude regularly, or keeping your accounts better, or improving family relationships as well. So this is one book that I have found extremely helpful. So I think anybody who's interested can definitely have a look at that.
Thank you. Shah, sir.
Okay. I am addicted to two things. How I got addicted, I'll tell you. I think Hindi everybody understands.
Yes.
So, ज़्यादातर women व्रत रखते हैं. व्रत समझते हैं ना, व्रत के करवा चौथ का व्रत, के हमारे पति की लंबी उम्र के लिए हम व्रत रखते हैं, उपवास रखते हैं, सोमवार रखते हैं, मंगलवार को उपवास रखते हैं, that kind of thing. So मैंने भी अपनी पत्नी की लंबी उम्र के लिए और सुखी संपन्न जीवन के लिए और उसका सौभाग्य अमर रहे, उसके लिए रखा है एक व्रत. और वो व्रत क्या है कि मैं रोज एक प्लेट पानी पूरी खाऊंगा.
Very good.
तो क्योंकि मैंने व्रत रखा है तो मैं रोज जाके एक प्लेट पानी पूरी खाता हूँ. And that has become my habit, that has become my addiction. So that's, I think it's a good addiction. I enjoy it, and मेरी बीबी की लंबी उम्र भी होगी और सुखी संपन्न जीवन भी होगा.
उसके पति का भी आयु लंबी होगी.
आयु लंबी होगी. उसके पति की, मेरी बीबी के पति की आयु लंबी होगी.
Yeah.
Second is I'm addicted to walking. I love walking. And initially, when I started walking, I started enjoying it. I started liking it. And after walking, my mood, my energy level will increase. So it's a positive reinforcement that every time I walk, I enjoyed it. Like after smoking drug, marijuana, how euphoric you feel. Similarly, after walking, I feel that happy. And the second advantage that now I am able to maintain my weight at 70 kg in spite of eating little more once in a while and having pani puri every day for last almost 3 to 4 years. So that is an additional advantage. And that's why I have cultivated this good habit of eating pani puri every day, and second, walking for at least 40 minutes every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. We started with the serious note, suicide and addiction, and ended with the lighter note with good healthy habits. Thank all speakers. They are excellent in treating patient as well as they are excellent orators. Thank you all. We will conclude this session today. Mr. Deepak, do you want to?
I am here. So thank you very much, audience. You logged in large numbers, and I believe when masters speak, followers come in large numbers. So 674 doctors logged in for today's webinar, with masters speaking like Dr. Shubhangi Parkar Madam, Dr. Nilesh Shah, and Dr. Bhushan, who added various forms of addiction leading to suicidal tendencies. We were knowing no to drugs, no to alcohol, but today we also came to know no to behavioral addiction, technology addiction. And I think it was apparent to give a new modern aspects to this International Day for Drug Abuse or Abstinence from Drugs. So thank you very much. On behalf of HealthNU, this is Deepak Naik. Would like to thank all the speakers, Dr. Shubhangi Parkar, Dr. Nilesh Shah, and Dr. Bhushan Shukla, and Dr. Amar Shinde for putting together this concept on the World Abstinence Day from Drugs. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to HealthNU to carry this webinar. We enjoyed carrying this webinar with the wonderful thoughts coming from our speakers. Thank you, audience. This started late at night at 9, but you came in large numbers. I hope you also must have got enlightened with this talk. This is Deepak Naik signing off on behalf of HealthNU. Keep supporting our products. Have a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Naik. Thank you, Amar.
Thank you, sir.
ma'am, and
Thank you so much.
Good night.